Hi, everyone. Welcome to our very first episode of EM History, where we look back at some of the wild, the wonderful, and sometimes weird stories from the past that shape the way we practice medicine today. Today, we're talking about sedation, particularly benzodiazepines, and how they came to be discovered simply because of a really good cleanup crew. Now, to paint the picture, sedation hadn't really had a very good history, and for centuries, people did not have a viable way to deal with anxiety, depression, or most neuropsychiatric illness, turning to opium and alcohol as either self or prescribed medication. The early 1900s didn't improve matters much with the addition of barbiturates, chloral hydrate, and reserpine, which were all connected to some seriously nasty side effects. Not to mention, they were terribly addictive, and accidental or intentional overdoses were often fatal, as was the case famously with Marilyn Monroe. Enter Leo Sternbach, a Polish American scientist who, during his postgraduate years in the 1930s, worked to create synthetic dyes using heptoxydiazine compounds. Why is this important? Well, cut to 2 decades later, and the world was introduced to Miltown or meprobamate, which became a popular tranquilizer, but again was habit forming with a lot of CNS adverse effects and a pretty scary lethal dose of about 12 grams. Sternbach, who was working for Roche Laboratories in the US at the time, saw the success of meprobamate and chlorpromazine, which was also quite popular at the time, and realized they had similar compounds to the heptoxydiazines he was experimenting on back in his college days. They didn't get the dyes they wanted to make, but maybe he could look into their sedative potential. He recognized his old buddy compounds as benzoxadiazepines and concocted 40 compounds by adding secondary or tertiary amines. As a fluke, one of the compounds he stabilized with a primary amine called methylamine and labeled this RO5 0690 and put it on a shelf. Unfortunately, all the other compounds were found to be inert with no real sedative potential, and by this time he was told he needed to move on. Interestingly, Leo Sternbach was a famously messy dude, and he left his lab as is after his failure. 2 years later, in 1957, the institution asked for the lab to be cleaned up, and the workers saw that there was a small vial sitting there labeled RO5 0690 amidst all the mess. The vial was submitted for a standard batch of tests in the hopes of, at the very least, you could publish some chemical findings off of the compound. Lo and behold, they found that the compound actually had actions similar to meprobamate. Not only that, they found in later studies to have lower toxicity, identified the compound formally as 1,4 benzodiazepine, introduced in 1960 as methaminodiazepoxide, or chlordiazepoxide as it's better known, under the brand name of Librium. 3 years later, after some tinkering, an upgraded version was released, aka diazepam, quickly becoming one of the most prescribed drugs through the 60s and 70s, with uses as an anticonvulsant, muscle relaxant, and sedative. In the emergency department, the rapid action, efficacy, and favorable safety profile of benzodiazepines is well known, and it forms a backbone of management of seizures, sedation, and anxiolysis, among other things. Medicine is strange in that its seemingly insignificant events sometimes wind up creating the biggest impact on future practice and understanding. If anything is to be learned from the discovery of benzodiazepines, it's that nothing in clinical research is ever truly futile. Dyes are weirdly close to sleeping pills at the chemical level. And last but not least, always tidy up. I'm Azur Rahman, and this has been ECREM Talks EM History.